Morning. This is the Rhode Island Ethics Commission. This is our fifth meeting for 2026. We have a quorum of 7 commissioners. Both Commissioners Ritchie and Strauss had intended to attend, but they each had unavoidable conflicts arise that prevent their attendance. This is effectively a special meeting of this commission. As you know, it's a continuance of the hearing in In re James v. Thorson. So it's sort of a special meeting. We have a very limited agenda today. Here's a little roadmap. We're going to hear closing arguments from the lawyers for each party. We're going to go into executive session and deliberate. We will make no decisions during the deliberations. Come back into open session and go through a decision-making process. The next regular meeting of the Ethics Commission is next week, April 14th. On the closing arguments today, the primary purpose is to reply to each other's post-trial memos as we discussed last time. And have not, as chair of this commission, set any time limits, but I urge you to keep them fairly short. I want to compliment both sides for presenting very effective and good memos. We've all read them closely, so to the extent you can keep your comments short, we'd appreciate it. During arguments and after arguments, the commission will not interrupt. We will not be asking questions of counsel after the closings. This is purely for you to present your arguments and not part of the evidentiary piece of the trial. In the deliberations, we'll go into executive session. Only the commission members will deliberate. We discuss the case. We make no decisions in deliberations. Commission counsel, Mr. DeSimone, will be present to answer legal questions that may arise. He will keep a record of the questions and answers. The commission will then return to open session. And we will go through a decision-making process during the open session. And among those things will be determining findings of fact. The commission will not hear from or question the parties during the decision-making process. The commission will vote separately on the 3 remaining counts of the complaint. As everyone in the room knows, a majority vote carries the day. I want to do a little reminder here for everybody in the room. Mr. Thorson enjoys the presumption of innocence. The prosecution bears the burden of presenting evidence to overcome the presumption. The commission considers all of the evidence in the record and determines whether the preponderance of the evidence supports a finding of a violation of the Code of Ethics. Anything you wish to add, Mr. DeSimone?
No, just that in the closing arguments, the respondent will go first and the prosecution last, and that's because the prosecution bears the burden of proof in this case.
Mr. Abbott? I'm sorry. Mr. Kelly, I've said before, I have problems with names here too.
In the course of my argument, I'm going to refer to the events immediately before and after the lunch. Prepared a really simple timeline. It's a chalk, not a submission of evidence or anything like that. I'd like to hand it out if the commission thinks it would be helpful.
Sorry. Based on advice of counsel, that's acceptable.
Okay. I don't think you can.
Am I just passing them?
Yeah, thank you.
So it's clear on the record, this is being offered by Mr. Thorson's counsel as a demonstrative piece for his oral argument or closing argument. It is not, I would question whether it's even part of the record. It's merely presented to us as an outline to follow as we go through your argument. Is that correct?
That is correct, similar to a chalk chart.
Not an exhibit.
It's not an exhibit. It's purely for your use and our use as we see fit.
Let me follow up and start the top.
That's fine.
Which I have often been accused of. But first of all, good morning, Mayor Jones, ladies and gentlemen of the commission. Thank you for being here today. My name is Fred Kelly, and I'm proud to represent Jim Thorson in this matter. But I'm sad, actually, that I have to be here because Jim Thorson didn't do anything wrong. Jim Thorson never accepted a free lunch or anything else from Scout or anyone else. Mr. Patton told him in person and by email that he was paying for the lunch at Irwin's. Mr. Thorson believed him, quite rightly. When Mr. Thorson found out that Mr. Patton hadn't paid the bill as he had promised, Mr. Thorson immediately reached out for a bill and then paid it. These are the facts. They're simple, straightforward, and conclusive. As you heard, the prosecution had the burden of proof, and when going through the transcript, what really jumped out at me was Mr. DeSimone's manifestation of that very, very early in the hearing. There exists by statute a presumption of innocence on the part of the respondent. Prosecution bears the burden of proving by preponderance of the evidence that the respondent has committed a knowing and willful violation of the code of ethics or the procurement statute as to each and every count. Courts have looked at this and fleshed it out a little bit. And there's a dispute in our briefing, as you can probably tell, about where we are on that. Prosecution relies on a case called Carmody and ignores the latest, and we believe, controlling case, the Flaherty case. Courts have made it very, very clear. In order to find a violation, it has to be deliberate conduct. Okay, the respondent has to be found to have deliberately violated the statute for there to be a knowing and willful violation. It cannot be the product of mistake, inadvertence, or confusion. It must be deliberate. Prosecution ignores this. Flaherty makes it crystal clear. And there's a separate section called deliberateness. And there, the court makes it very, very clear that the act or omission constituting a violation of law must have been deliberate. It's contrasted with an act that is the result of mistake, inadvertence, or accident. The commission at that time was basically saying the knowing and willful standard subsumes deliberateness. In response to that, the court in Flaherty found that, quote, the Ethics Commission's construction of the Supreme Court's language is tortured at best. Yet again, that's what's happening here today with the prosecution, asking you to apply the Carmody knowing and willful standard in ignoring deliberate standard. Flaherty court went on to talk again about intent and says it is indisputable that there's an intent element that must be found before a knowing and willful violation of the code can occur. There needs to be specific intent to perform the act itself or the omission. It must have been deliberate. So that is the legal standard that the commission must apply to this matter. That is also supported by the Dupree case, another Supreme Court case after Carmody, that made it very, very clear that the action must be found to be deliberate. Prosecution doesn't even attempt to make that showing. It focuses on reasonableness and unreasonableness. That's not the standard. That's one piece of it, but the ultimate conclusion is deliberateness. In fact, I did a word search of the prosecution's brief, and the word deliberate does not appear, even though it's in the Dupree case and in the Flaherty case. Carmody does not mean what the prosecution says it means, which is knowing and willful is somehow subsumed within unreasonable or reasonable. Talks about the Carmody case, which was a case where a councilman in Narragansett ignored several notices that he was in violation of the ethics statute because he had to file a financial report, and he didn't do it, supposedly relying on the town council. Prosecution says Carmody's claim of reliance on the council president's assurance is similar to the incident respondent's claim of reliance on Patton's offer to pay for lunch. Completely different. As we've heard through the evidence, Mr. Thorson was told that Mr. Patton was going to pay for lunch, had no reason to believe that he didn't until Monday morning following the trip. Carmody received notice after notice after notice that he was in violation of the ethics statute. And the court found that there was liability there because he, quote, consciously chose to ignore complying with the statute, even when he had been told that he wasn't in compliance. That didn't happen here. Facts aren't even close. The facts really are more like Flaherty case. And in the Flaherty case, Judge Flaherty was accused of violating the ethics code because he didn't include a nonprofit of which he was, I believe, the chair in his declaration for several years. And when he was on the stand, he testified, and this was compelling. In fact, it was decisive. He said, I know I read the form. I'd filled it out for many years. It just never crossed my mind that the nonprofit was a corporation so that I had to complete the form and include it. And that was decisive. It didn't cross his mind. We really have the same thing here. What we have here is, and this is right out of the transcript, page 205 and 206, Mr. Thorson's question. Now, again, staying with the restaurant, had you known, Mr. Thorson, that David Patton did not make arrangements to pay for lunch, what would you have done? Answer, I would have paid. So there is no deliberate act here. There is no, I knew about it and ignored it. There is no, I was told I had to pay and I didn't. It's not like they sat down at the table and hadn't said, gee, I'm not paying for lunch. But gee, thanks, Eric Lindsay, thanks for buying us lunch. We have to leave now. Nothing like that happened. So applying the proper standard, it's clear there was no deliberate act and therefore no violation. Excuse me. But it's not just Mr. Thorson's testimony. It's the testimony in the affidavits. The two folks from Scout, Mr. Abbott Ball and Mr. Pico. Now, the prosecution poo-poos these, and I have to say, in light of all the time we spent on what is hearsay and what isn't hearsay, and whether or not this committee can consider it, if the situation wasn't so serious, the prosecutor's reversal on this point would almost be comical. He says that those affidavits are hearsay. You should consider those. You can't rely on them. Those are statements under oath under the pain and penalty of perjury that both of those people voluntarily submitted. And think about the circumstances to getting the affidavits. They're angry, clearly, about Patton's behavior on March 10th, as we know from the project was never funded. They don't have any obligation to do or say anything. We had to subpoena them, set up depositions, which, by the way, the prosecution could have done, and had the right to attend and ask its own questions. Yet they agreed to provide these statements under oath. And the statements are, and I don't want to engage in hyperbole, pretty much fully exonerated. What do I mean by that? If you look at page 3 and 4 of both affidavits, it lays out the situation pretty clearly about the lunch at Irwin's. Mr. Patton arranged it, and only Mr. Patton arranged. There was no bill presented. There was no menu. There was no choice. They were in a hurry. Had to get up and leave quickly. Then the email, response to the email. And perhaps most importantly is their view. There was some indication in the opening that this was somehow some arm twisting going on, or they were sucking up to Mr. Thorson because of the relationship with the state. But they're very, very clear that at no paragraph 21, at no time did Mr. Thorson do or say anything that made me think he was aware of the emails and the text that Scott had received from Mr. Patton about the tour and the lunch. At no time did Mr. Thorson do or say anything that made me think he did not intend to pay for the lunch we had on March 10th. At no time did Mr. Thorson do or say anything that made me think he was expecting Scott to give him anything of value for any reason or purpose. Finally, at no time did Mr. Thorson ask for or indicate that he wanted anything of value from Scout for any reason or purpose. So once again, going back to the Florida legal standard, there is absolutely no evidence or indication of any deliberate act on Mr. Thorson's part to do anything that violates state ethics. Prosecution tries to turn that on its head and basically says the fact that the respondents didn't do or say anything to indicate to Scout he didn't pay for lunch, that's the point. It's not the point. The point is the prosecution has the burden of proof. You don't have to prove he didn't. They have to prove he did. And all of the evidence is that Mr. Patton told him he would pay for lunch and he relied on it. So under the deliberateness standard, which the prosecution has ignored, they haven't proven any of the required elements. And that's exactly what the affidavits show didn't happen. That, we believe, should basically be the end of the inquiry. No evidence of deliberate behavior in any of the 3 charges. But taking it a step further, since the prosecution made some statements in its brief that certain things were apparently uncontested, and going back to the fact that they do have the burden of proof, a couple of things to point out, which we raise in our brief. Number one, the charge that the value of the lunch was in excess of $100. Facts don't support it. The prosecution's own exhibit, which is the bill, shows that the per person charge was $131.65. But there's a private room charge of $200. That's $50 a person. There was no private room. Mr. Thorson testified they were out in the middle of the restaurant having lunch. Take that off, it's down to $81. That's not $100 or higher. Again, not knowing, not deliberate. He also didn't establish that Scout, the state vendor, paid for the lunch. And again, if you go back to the affidavit about what happened, it's also pretty clear that they hadn't paid for the lunch. Because Mr. Abitbol received the email says that on March 13, Scott received an email from Mr. Thorson thanking me for the visit and asking me for a bill for the lunch. In response to Mr. Thorson's request for a bill, I contacted Irwin's and asked them for a bill for lunch. Again, I did not discuss any of the details surrounding lunch at Irwin's. So the lunch was had at Irwin's. There's no evidence that Scout paid for it or was ever asked to pay for it, but rather Mr. Abitbol went and got a bill and sent it. Well, under questioning from prosecution, when he was asked why he didn't reach out to Irwin's or the chef, Mr. Thorson says, quote, "I wouldn't even know how to do that." So he reached out to the people whose email addresses and phone numbers he had and asked them for the bill. No evidence that they paid anything. So I've given you a the time. The copy of the timeline to go through, but just to put it a little bit in context and respond to some of the prosecution's claim. So start off with rewinding the clock a little bit. Mr. Patton is hired, interviews well, has a history with CCRI, everything's fine. Runs the CRA project and deals with Scout, no reported problems, project moves forward. Mr. Thorson tenders his resignation on February 23, effective April 28. Then set up a trip for Bach with three purposes: due diligence, let them know the state was still interested, and to reinforce that Mr. Patton is going to be running the show, particularly since after Mr. Thorson leaves in about a month and a half. Mr. Patton makes all the arrangements, including a lunch at Irwin's that Mr. Thorson doesn't learn about until they're on the plane. Trip is scheduled for March 10th. The night before, there's a subcommittee hearing. Mr. Thorson testifies, Mr. Patton testifies. No evidence, any problems. Everything looks fine. Staff goes out to dinner. Mr. Thorson joins them and leaves early. He hears Mr. Patton being boisterous and needling the waitress. Because of the size of the crowd and seating, he doesn't hear anything else that later turns out to be a very, very serious problem. He learns about that the next day. Goes to bed before 10. Mr. Patton sends an email a little after midnight. He did at 25. Apologizes for being a little obnoxious. Says lunch is on me. Next morning, he's up at 3:30 or so. Gets a text from the chief of staff from the night before. Says that Dave might be having a manic episode. Call me when you get a good minute. Nothing urgent about that. Call me right away. This is a problem. And again, to put things in context, for better or for worse, we live in a world of hyperbole. Two people look at the same thing, and there's four different things. There's a very, very famous movie about that. 7 witnesses to a particular event, and they all have a different version of what really happened. Mr. Thorson saw that when he saw it as high energy. Mr. Patton was a high energy person. Saying someone's having a manic episode, particularly when you're not a doctor or it's from a doctor, that's pretty serious. And particularly in the context that Mr. Thorson testified about, the HR sensitivities that he faced as head of the director of administration. So he had to be very, very careful about considering that. But there was no great urgency to the message. Call me when you get a good minute. Not a doctor, wasn't sure to make of it. He meets Mr. Patton at the gate. As he said, he's very, very high energy. And basically said, it was later than I would like, but he looked fine to me. He looked like he usually looks, and that's in the transcript at page 111. Now, prosecution makes a big deal about the fact that he got to the gate on the late side. And I know we're arguing the facts in the law, and I don't mean to personalize it, but if my daughter got to the gate on the flight we were leaving at 15 minutes early, it would be an earth-shattering event. Some people just show up when they show up, and there's nothing you can read into that, and there's nothing wrong with it. On the plane, Mr. Patton goes through the itinerary in detail, tells Mr. Thorson about lunch at Irwin's, and then he doesn't pay. So why is that important? It's important because Mr. Thorson knows that. There is some lack of clarity when he actually reads the email that says the same thing, but it says the same thing and buttresses that testimony. And also, it's important, as Mr. Thorson points out, as part of the handoff, that Mr. Patton be seen as the person in charge. Okay? He's going to pay for the lunch, and Mr. Thorson is going to reimburse him. And that again is pretty clear. But the prosecution tries to make something of this and says, oh, for the first time when being questioned by his counsel, he revealed that he was told on the plane that Mr. Patton was going to pay. Well, I went back and I looked at the transcript, and this is at page 97. And Mr. Thorson is being questioned by the prosecution and says, I heard that on the plane ride on the way down from Director Patton. Okay, this is the prosecution. Okay, we'll talk about that. I'm sure we will hear about that. But the prosecution never comes back into the questioning and says, okay, what else did you talk about on the plane? Never does that. Mr. Bristow does that on direct, which of course is very common. Typically, you have direct examination first and cross later. This was out of order because it was the prosecution's witness and they had the right to do it. But the fact that you don't follow up on the line of questioning and then accuse the witness of somehow being dishonest or covering it up or making stuff up, that's not right, and it didn't happen. So again, several places in the brief, the prosecution talks about Mr. Thorson's testimony not being credible. The very polite way that lawyers, including myself, often use to say, I think he's lying. And given the deliberateness standard, the fact that the testimony is uncontroverted about what Mr. Thorson knew and when he knew it, testimony was. The prosecution is urging you, and I believe the prosecution can only prevail if in fact you find that Mr. Thorson sat in that chair for almost 5 hours, answered questions, and looked at everyone and didn't tell the truth. That's what the prosecution has to demonstrate to prevail, because the testimony itself is crystal clear. Anyway, back to the plane ride. So he finds out about the lunch. Then Mr. Thorson responds to the emails from Scout confirming that they're going to go to Irwin's for lunch. They take the tour. There were 3 uncomfortable comments by Mr. Patton. Talked about those, that Miss Scanapico's dog is fat, asked for the daycare license, which is inappropriate, and makes some comments about the ethnicity of her doctor, which is completely inappropriate. Mr. Thorson is aware of those. He's not aware of any of the others. Again, that's uncontroversial. Heard a comment about Miss Scanapico's husband, but thought he knew he was in Australia and didn't attribute anything to it. Nothing like what we see in the email. Why is that important? Because it informs what he's thinking, why he's thinking it, and only under the prosecution's view of the case, not under Flaherty, only under the prosecution's view of the case, you have to consider whether or not the continued reliance on the promise to pay lunch was reasonable. That's it. That's the only part where that has any input. They go to Irwin's. Mr. Thorson then views the message from his chief of staff saying that other staff had comments about Dave's behavior last night. This is while they're in Irwin's having lunch. Mr. Patton leaves for about 20 minutes. They have lunch, not seated in the private room, not presented with menus, couldn't order their own food, they're not presented with a bill. There was no staff member at Irwin's capable of preparing or presenting a bill. And this is from Ms. Scanapico's affidavit. Plane ride home, things start to pile up. He's on the phone with the chief of staff, they're gonna have a meeting. To get back, he arranges that meeting at 5 o'clock. They get home, talk about ladder 33 on Thursday night, meets with the chief of staff, makes arrangements to meet Monday morning. He's got a situation on his hands, he realizes, but he has to collect information. He can't jump to conclusions. He can't just react on a little bit of information. Human resources issues are very, very serious. Got someone saying that something happened at the dinner, turned out it was probably true. At the time, didn't know, it was an allegation. So what did Mr. Thorson do? He did the responsible thing. He set up a means to collect information, to do an investigation, to get the facts. He got HR involved. He wanted to make the right decision. So he did the right thing through the right process. Over the weekend, right, things start to snowball. And on Sunday, Mr. Thorson receives an email from DOA staffers describing Mr. Patton's behavior. First piece of real concrete evidence he gets. Very serious, he takes it serious. Around noon on Sunday, he speaks with Tony Alfonso, who reads portions of the email from Scout, describing Mr. Patton's inappropriate behavior, terrible behavior that Mr. Thorson was not aware of. So things are growing, he's getting more facts. He can start to make informed decisions. Then between 2 and 5, he speaks with Paul Dion, the director, and Ellen Murtis, who had attended the gathering, and they confirmed that Patton had behaved erratically that evening. He hadn't seen it, he hadn't heard it until then. Monday morning, between 8 and 9 AM, he has a meeting with staff. They had scheduled prior Friday. Laura Hart comes in, says she had an inquiry from the Providence Journal regarding an invoice for lunch. It is then he realizes, gee, I didn't see Dave pay for lunch. He puts this together with the fact that he lied to me about whether or not he had paid for or taken some vegan cheese and sneakers. And so everything is coming together now. He realizes there's a problem. He immediately, or there might be a problem, because he's not positive at this point Patton hasn't paid. So what does he do? He picks up the phone and he calls Abbott. No answer, so he sends the email at 9:04. And there's a piece of testimony that I think really summarizes what's going on at that point. And so the prosecutor asks Mr. Thorson, and this is this transcript at 155. So you're saying, and this is Monday, as of Monday night. So you're saying that up until this moment, you're saying that you thought that David Patton paid for lunch. Answer. Well, let me just say, in light of everything that was unfurling between ladder 133 and then the stuff, his behavior at Scout, I didn't give lunch thought until it was mentioned to me. That's the same thing as Flaherty saying, it never crossed my mind. Same exact thing. Can't be delivered. And when he told me that he was going to buy, I expected him to buy and then get with him, which means to pay him later. But then everything happened and it was like, that was up here and lunch was down here. I remember this gesture when he was sitting in the chair. Everything else is up here, lunch is down here. The human mind can't think of everything of equal importance at the same time. It naturally prioritizes that. The most important thing there was what was going on with the Patton, the staff, problems at Ladder 133, and what they were going to do from an HR response. So this captures, I think, everything that we really need to think about. Gotta be thorough and careful about what he's doing in his investigation. He'd been told Patton would pay for lunch. It was important for Patton to do that because of reinforcing his role. The morning had been bumpy. The 3 incidents Mr. Thorson witnessed and the text he received were no indication of what was done, not at all. Patton wasn't perfect, but there was no indication he was lying or doing or saying things Mr. Thorson later learned of until he learned of them Sunday and Monday. What happened at the restaurant, what didn't happen, didn't raise a red flag. If Patton had promised he was going to pay, there would have been no bill presented. Once they left and Mr. Thorson learned more about it, that's when he first took the steps, or continued to take the steps to collect the information. And we have Respondents Exhibit C, which is a text he sent over the weekend, which is that shows clearly his first thought is for Patton's health and safety, as he told Mr. Alfonso. So a couple of more factually focused things I'd like to respond to from the brief. At a high level. First of all, prosecution says at page 13, Scout received no amount of lawful consideration in return for the meal until a month later. Well, as we've seen, Scout didn't pay for the lunch. But more to the point, that's misleading. Mr. Thorson called and emailed as soon as he found out there might be a problem. 10 days later, he gets an email back from Mr. Abbott, and then he paid within 15 days. In between there, he's waiting for an answer. Do I have to pay for just myself or myself and Patton? He gets no answer, so he pays for both with a bank check, which he had to go get because he didn't want to have his personal information out there. So the second thing that the prosecution talks about is the statement that's released. Well, according to the transcript, the statement was released on June 4th. That's on page 92 of the transcript. Would that have been on or about June 4th, 2023? Do you know? That sounds about right. Well, June 4th, according to what I've been able to garner from the record, was a few weeks before the ethics complaint was filed and released, but after the email was released. And I'd like to put a pin in the email for a minute. Mr. Grimmett really fought to get that in front of you. He really wanted you to see that email. Other than what Mr. Alfonso told Mr. Thorson, the email is of no relevance. It's not released to the public. Mr. Thorson doesn't see it until June. Why? Why is it so important that you have that email? Now, we brought it in front of you because we want it excluded. So that's a little bit of a problem that lawyers have when they want to get things excluded. They have to put it in front of the person who they don't want to see it. That's the nature of the system. But why is it so important that you have the full text of that email? And why did you fight so hard to get it admitted as a full exhibit? It's an old trick in the lawyer world. I don't want to poison the well a little bit. Yeah, maybe he didn't really do this, but look at all this other stuff. He was there. And maybe he saw it, maybe he didn't. No evidence of that, but just maybe we can push things in the right direction. So please be skeptical of that. And I just want to, I know you're conscious of this, but just remind you to take it for why it's offered. It's offered for the fact that it exists. The only evidentiary impact it has, what was read, was of course, by Mr. Alfonso last Sunday night. So the fact that Mr. Patton paying for the lunch isn't mentioned in that statement, press release, is of no import. It was not an issue at the time. It wasn't the point of the response. Mr. Thorson being high energy, prosecution makes a big deal out of that. It was high energy. A lot of people have high energy. I don't think that's a disqualifying factor in performing your job there.
You met Mr. Patton.
I'm sorry, Mr. Thorson said Mr. Patton was high energy, right? That's what I meant to say. Excuse me. I don't see how that has any impact on what's going on here. People are who they are. That's not an indication that people can't do their job or that there's something wrong with them. As far as Mr. Patton's offer to pay the tab at ladder 33, which Mr. Thorson said he didn't take seriously, he didn't take it seriously. Completely different situation from what's happening the next day. That's not an evening, everyone's out, it's all the staff. Mr. Thorson is the senior person. As he said before, I know they can't pay for me or he can't pay for me, or if he does, I have to make plans to reimburse him, which is what he did in Philadelphia. So Mr. Thorson pays the tab and leaves. The next day is a different situation. Again, uncontroverted testimony, one of the points of the trip was to establish Mr. Patton, the person who was really going to be running the show after Mr. Thorson resigned. So he had to make that presentation, wanted them to see him pay, and then he would reimburse them. Different situation, completely logical explanation. Late arrival to the airport, we've already talked about. Pardon me. And then the accumulation of everything being that as things start to unfurl, lunch is not the top of Mr. Thorson's mind. It's not until Monday morning when he gets that inquiry from Ms. Hart that he realizes he may have a problem and needs to take affirmative action. No evidence of any deliberate behavior by Mr. Thorson to get a free lunch from Scout or anyone else at any time. And as soon as he finds out, he takes reasonable steps to correct it. So, sort of wrapping up that whole sequence of events, what is the prosecution really saying? It's undisputed that there was no bill presented. It's undisputed that a bill could not have been presented because there was no one there to prepare one. So is this supposed to be about performance? If Mr. Thorson or anyone else had asked for a bill, the answer would have been, can't get you one. Okay, send me one next week, and everything would unwind the way it has unwound. That's the reality of this. So really, what's the point? Is the point to impose something like strict liability or negligence on the statute? That's improper. Supreme Court has said it has to be knowing, has to be willful, has to be deliberate. This standard the prosecution wants has been rejected by Flaherty. Has to be a deliberate act. So there are some things I'd like you to consider. And they're a little bit different from the specific stuff we've been talking about, but I think they're important. I'd like to consider three things. First of all, I'd like you to consider the context. Mr. Thorson had resigned. He was doing this to find facts and bolster Mr. Patton. He had nothing to gain. There is zero indication he ever wanted or expected or asked for anything from Scott. The two people most likely to want to see him stumble could not be clearer in their testimony. Mr. Abbott-Ball and Ms. Scanapico are crystal clear. Never felt like he was asking for something, never asked for anything, never felt like he was looking for anything. He didn't know about the lunch until we got there. Completely supports what was done. And he's concerned about the health and safety. That is the focus. That becomes the focus as he learns more facts. So the lunch does not come to the fore to the following morning. So we have to be conscious and careful of everyone's rights, investigate the facts, get help from HR, and make the right decision. That's what's driving him as he learns more and more about Mr. Patton. The second thing I'd like you to consider is the man. Mr. Thorson has had 4 different stints of state service. Impeccable, spotless record. Under 2 governors, 3 actually. 95 to 99, 2015 to 2016, 20 to 2021, and 2021 to 2023. For that, he was a successful private businessman. Again, there is no reason for him to even consider or want in any way to get a free lunch from Scout. No reason to do what he's done. And third, I'd like you to consider the consequences. So as we've heard, this has been professionally ruinous for Mr. Thorson. He had a job with the US Treasury. That contract expired, was canceled, was not renewed. He's been told that he didn't get interviews or job offers just because this is pending. Again, so what is the point? Is the point that we don't want state employees to trust each other? If someone says, I'm gonna go pick up lunch, you say, great, they pick it up, they come back, pay them when they get back, someone else pays for the lunch, they pay them later. Can they not rely on what their fellow employees tell them? Is that really the point? Is the point that constantly asking and doubting and not just doing the business of the state is what motivates and drives everything they do? I don't think so. I don't think that accomplishes anything or helps anyone. In any event, to wrap up, thank you very, very much for your time, your attention, your patience. I'm sure I've gone longer than you wanted me to, but I felt like there were some important things that had to be said. And thank you for the opportunity to say that. When everything is done, hope you will find what the evidence is shown, which is that there's no deliberate conduct against the person's part. There's no violation of state ethics statute or the procurement statute, and that these claims be dismissed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Graham, this was presented to you today, I assume. You need time to review it before you argue?
No. Thank you and good morning. Jason Brandon for the people of the state of Rhode Island. I'm not going to take too much time this morning. I think I would just begin by quickly ticking off a few responses to some of the things that we've heard before I forget about them, before I continue on. I guess let's start just briefly. I want to talk about the knowing and willful standard, the Carmody case, the Dupree case. Just to be clear, the law of the land in the state of Rhode Island as to what knowing and willful means is the Carmody case and the Dupree case. Those are Supreme Court cases. Flaherty case is a Superior Court case. And it may be a persuasive argument as to what the standard should be, but it is not the law of the land. Carmody and Dupree are. And if you look at your own commission decisions, the decisions that you cite in the Ethics Commission decisions are the Supreme Court cases of Carmody and Dupree. So that's why I rely on the Supreme Court cases of Carmody. That being said, that being said, I do want to say that as I will argue here this morning.
No, gotta back up. Sorry. Come and take a photo, but please don't stand in there.
As you'll hear this morning, there is substantial evidence, certainly a preponderance of the evidence, that will show knowing and willful conduct under all of the standards, including the Flaherty standard. So to the extent that you want to apply or be persuaded by the Flaherty standard, there is a preponderance of the evidence that this was a knowing and willful violation under that standard, and I'll get to that. Moving on, just to briefly mention the affidavits. I don't get accused of sharp practice very often, or ever. But I just want to note that the affidavits are hearsay. They're being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. They are, by definition, hearsay. I'm not arguing that you shouldn't consider them. I introduced them. Those are my exhibits. So, of course, I want you to consider them. And they're authentic, and you're allowed to consider them. But they're hearsay, which means they are inherently not as reliable as other documents. And that's the point that I was making. The email that I wanted you to see, the scathing email, was not admitted for the truth of the matter asserted. And I believe that I agreed to that at the hearing. So the idea that I'm playing some lawyer's trick to try and get you to poison the well is untrue. I'll just leave it at that. This issue of the private room charge, the entire restaurant was a private room. And that's what the evidence is. So the fact that they weren't put into a small private room is irrelevant. And the idea, and I just want you to remember that a bill was presented, it was not contested, and that's the testimony, and it was paid. And so for now, 3 years later, to say, oh, well, the bill wasn't quite right, I don't think is appropriate. So we'll move on from there. Finally, the issue of whether Scout paid for lunch or didn't pay for lunch, that is pure speculation. They don't know whether Scout paid for lunch or didn't pay for lunch. But what we do know is that a check was sent to Scout and that check was cashed. So whether or not Scout paid the entire amount, the full amount, or none of it is really irrelevant. The standard in the gift case, in the gift rule, if you look at it, is the value is either the actual value or the fair market value. And there was no contesting that the fair market value of this lunch was $131 per person. So those are the points I just wanted to address there. Now, thought I might get off track if I address their points. But I'm going to get back on track. So the post-trial memorandum that I submitted, I think, I'm sorry it's so long, but I do think one thing it does is it very well sets out the elements of each of the three counts that are pending before you. And I would submit to you that those elements are established. And just to give you an example of the gift rule, for instance, element 1, person is subject to the code. I think that's pretty clear that he is. Element number 2, Scout is an interested person. I haven't heard any dispute over that. Number 3, Scout provided a gift. We know that Scout did provide a gift. What is disputed is whether he knew Scout provided a gift, but the elements are established. What is in dispute as to these counts is the knowing and willful standard. And I think the defense that I'm hearing is that it's not knowing and willful because Mr. Thorson didn't know that Scout was providing a gift. Instead, Mr. Thorson believed that David Patton had paid the value he paid for the lunch. So, we could phrase it another way, which is that the defense is that the respondent didn't believe that he had violated the code by accepting a gift from a vendor because he had intended to violate the code by accepting a gift from a subordinate. Either of those would have violated the gift rule. More on that later. So that's the factual finding that's in dispute. Whether Thorson believed that Patton had paid for lunch, whether Thorson knew that Scout had provided them. Those are the two issues, really, that we're here arguing about today. Because if you find that Thorson never believed that Patton had actually paid for lunch, and if you find that Thorson knew that Scout was providing this lunch, then that's knowing and willful. If you can make those two findings, that satisfies Carmody, Dupree, Flaherty, and I'm urging you today to make those two findings. And I'm going to argue, going forward from here, that there is not just a preponderance of the evidence to show that Mr. Thorson knew that David Patton did not pay, and that Mr. Thorson knew that Scout had actually provided the lunch. There's substantial evidence, and I'm going to lay out what that evidence is. So let's start with this issue that there's substantial evidence in the record that James Thorson knew that David Patton didn't pay for lunch. It begins the night before at ladder 131. Ladder 131, the testimony is that at some point, David Patton, so he's out with his subordinates, including David Patton. David Patton says, order anything you want. It's on me. I think that's a pretty clear statement that he's offering to pay Patton. The testimony is that Mr. Thorson didn't take that seriously. And that seems credible. You wouldn't take it seriously. Why would you not take that seriously? Because as he testified, he knew they couldn't pay for food. They, meaning all of his subordinates, including David Patton. So when one of your subordinates says, it's on me, you don't take it seriously. You don't take it seriously because you know that if you did and you allowed that to happen, you would violate the code of ethics. Mr. Thorson testified that he's had ethics training. He's been in state government for years and years and years, familiar with the ethics rules. So that's credible testimony. And that's the testimony that I think you can believe. Now, why can you believe it? Why is it so credible? Because he repeats it about the lunch the next day. When talking about lunch at Irwin's the next day, and under questioning about what does lunch is on me even mean? Remember how the testimony changes over and over. What did you think that meant? Lunch is on me. Well, I thought he would arrange for the lunch. Okay. Would he pay for the lunch? Was the question? Yes. Well, I knew he couldn't pay for me. So he repeats it again. He knew last night that David Patton couldn't pay for him because that would violate the code of ethics. And in response to the discussion about Irwin's, he knows that David Patton can't pay for him because that would violate the code of ethics. So then I have, well, if you know he can't pay for you, then how could he pay for you? Paraphrasing. And the response now we hear, well, I would reimburse him. And this is the first time we've heard anything about reimbursement. And I would reimburse him doesn't really fit in with the statement, lunch is on me, right? When someone, I think we all know what lunch is on me means. It doesn't mean, hey, I'll pay, but make sure you pay me back later. And then I asked, well, did you discuss reimbursement with David Patton? No, we never got to that. So, so here we have evidence that he never took this seriously, that he knew that David Patton couldn't pay for him. And that in truth, he didn't expect David Patton to pay for him. Now, the other evidence on the record, we've already gone through, and I'm not going to go through all of David Patton's strange, obnoxious, inconsistent behavior, but that's also evidence that the respondent never really believed, never took it seriously that David Patton was going to pay for lunch. The lunch itself, where David Patton is for the most part, not even part of the lunch, is a good indication that David Patton is not going to pay for lunch. The fact that no bill is presented, the fact that the respondent never sees a bill, never sees David Patton pay for lunch, never asks him, never, to date apparently, asks him if he's paid for lunch, doesn't ask anyone else if David Patton has paid for lunch. The reason he's not asking is because he didn't believe that David Patton had paid for lunch or was going to pay for lunch. So there is substantial evidence on the record for you to make a finding that the respondent never took seriously or believed that David Patton had paid for lunch. And along with that, there is substantial evidence available for you to make a finding. And in fact, the respondent always knew that it was Scout who was providing lunch to him. Recount some of that evidence. Let's start with the two separate emails that the respondent received the day, that were sent to him the day before the lunch, that he testified he received and he responded to as he arrived in Philadelphia, both from Scout employees. So the first is from Jess Kribda, a Scout employee, and this is the email that says, Hi, Director Thorson. We are excited for your site visit to Bach tomorrow. Please let me know if you have any food allergies as we prepare your lunch at Irwin's, and don't hesitate to reach out. So this is a Scout employee writing that we are preparing your lunch at Irwin's. Let us know if you have allergies. And the respondent replies before the lunch that he's allergic to calamari. The second, that's exhibit 19. Exhibit 20 is from another Scout employee to Director Thorson and Director Patton saying, here is, please see the attached for a detailed itinerary for your site visit tomorrow. The itinerary includes 11:15 lunch at Irwin's, Chef Michael Ferrari. So Scout is arranging for this lunch. The evidence is that Scout has put this together. Patton didn't put together this itinerary. Scout put together this itinerary. Patton's not arranging for lunch at Irwin's. He asked for it, and Scout complied. And they are providing this lunch at Irwin's. And as these emails make clear. Later, after the lunch, while they were retrieving their coats, Mr. Thorson testified that he told Lindsay and Everett, "Thank you for hosting today." So there's acknowledgement that this isn't just some walking around the Bach. There's hosting, and lunch is part of that hosting. Furthermore, lunch was not the only gift that was given and received that day. So accepting the gift of lunch from Scout is consistent with what the respondent had done earlier in the day. The testimony was when they arrived at Bach, their first stop after checking in was a coffee shop. And the respondent testified that he ordered and got a mocha. Yes, mocha cappuccino, I guess. I don't know, mocha. The questioning is, did you pay for it? No. So it is a gift. It's just a question of who the gift comes from. Well, who did pay for it? I understand David Patton paid for it. Did you see David Patton pay for it? No. Is it possible that Scout paid for that? It's possible. So the truth is, the day started out with someone buying him coffee, and he has no idea who it was. He understood it was David Patton, but he doesn't know. It could just as well have been Scout. We do know that Scout did give other gifts, other small, a tote bag, a jar of food, a notepad, promotional material. And the respondent testified that he accepted those and brought them back to Rhode Island with him and gave them to his staff. So by the time we get to lunch, this is a third incident of gift receipt. And his receipt of that gift from Scout is consistent with the other gifts that he received from Scout and the coffee that he might have received from Scout. He just doesn't know who gave him that. Finally, evidence that he knew it was Scout that had given him the lunch is clear from the 9 a.m. Monday morning email that the respondent sends to Everett Abbott. It's important to understand the chronology here. It's 9 a.m. Monday evening. The respondent has not met with David Patton. He hasn't talked to David Patton about whether or not David Patton paid, and that's in the testimony. He didn't ask Patton on Friday whether he had paid, didn't ask Saturday, didn't ask Sunday. So 9 a.m. he still hasn't asked. He has no idea, according to him, whether or not David Patton has paid. But the email says, Everett, I wanted to thank you and Lindsay for lunch Friday. More later, but can you please arrange the forwarded bill? So 9 a.m. Monday morning, now the respondent knows that they gave him the lunch. I want to thank you and Lindsay for lunch Friday. But what did he know at 9 a.m. on Friday that he didn't know at 11:45? No, on Monday, 9 a.m. on Monday, that he didn't know at 11:45 at the end of lunch on Friday? And the answer is nothing. He had no further information regarding who paid. Sure, he got some more information about David Patton and his behavior at Ladder 199. And he had some of that email read to him from Tony Afonso. But that email, if you look at it, doesn't say anything about who actually paid for the lunch. The only allegations in the email, the scathing email, are that Dave Patton had requested that we have lunch at Irving's. And so we did that. But it didn't say who paid, it didn't say Dave Patton paid, didn't say, so. Just to reiterate, at 9 a.m., if he knew at 9 a.m. on Monday that Lindsay and Everett had paid for lunch, then he must have known on Friday that Lindsay and Everett paid for lunch. And the excuse is, well, that was my way of finding out if Dave Patton had paid for lunch. But there's an easier way to find that out. The email could say, Everett, can you confirm that Dave Patton paid for that lunch? Because if not, I need a bill. So please forward me one if that's not the case. The idea that instead he's using, thanks for lunch in a fake, and that will somehow clue me in as to whether or not David Patton paid. Again, it doesn't make sense. When testimony doesn't make sense, you're allowed to discount it and look for the testimony that does make sense. Testimony that makes sense means what it says. I didn't take Dave Patton seriously. That's pretty clear testimony. I knew he couldn't pay for me. That's clear testimony. Thanks for the lunch, Lindsay and Everett. That's clear testimony. When it starts to get unclear is when, what does lunch is on me mean? It means this, it means that. So this is all my way of saying, commissioners, there is more than enough evidence to satisfy the preponderance standard, which I know your legal counsel will advise you on, for you to make findings of fact that the respondent never believed David Patton was paying for lunch. And in fact, the respondent always knew that Scout was providing this lunch. And if you make those findings of fact, that satisfies every known standard of knowing and willful, including Flaherty, if you choose to follow that superior court precedent. So with that, I urge you to make those findings of fact and to find that the respondent violated those 3 counts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Remick. Thank you, counsel.
Chair Jones,
Yes.
30 seconds. I mean, at the opening of
There's no reply. Sorry.
the notion that the speculation of who paid, that's done.
The argument's been made. We'll leave it at that. We didn't provide for a rebuttal.
I understand.
All right, that concludes the second item on the agenda for today. Is there a motion to go into executive session to
I think before we do that, Mr. Kelly should retrieve these aids. Sure. I don't think they can go into the deliberation.
Fair enough.
Exhibits.
Thank you.
Whenever we can sit in a minute.
I'm going to before we go in that way.
My new job, I would call it prior conversations.
Is there a motion to go into executive session to wit? In Ray James E. Thorson, complaint number 2023-7 pursuant to R.I. Gen. Law section 42-46-5A 2 and 4 for deliberations pursuant to section 36-14-13 subsections 8 and 9. And then a motion to return to open session. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Rabbit, is there a second?
Second,
Second by Commissioner Peterson, Commissioner Susie,
aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Commissioner Browner.
Aye.
Commissioner Callahan.
Aye.
Mr. Severani.
Aye.
Commissioner Rabideau.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. We'll now go into executive session, except we're gonna take at least a 5-minute break to give everybody a chance to get up and get around and do whatever you need to do, and then we'll be back here. 10 after then. We will fully go into executive session.